a nightmare to others!
Oh Lord! Oh Jesus Christ!
But I will give you a message. The message of death!
Come out to play.
Make no attempt to capture them. They are to be exterminated.
Matron, take them away! Oh!
Dada
Mrs. Peel, we're needed.
Hello there, and welcome to another episode of We Need to Talk About ... Once again, the middle-aged movie boys are here, as sophisticated as champagne, as hard as diamonds, and as cool as a pistol barrel, to take a retrospective look back over cult and classic film and TV from across the decades. I am the Big Daddy D, David Mabley, and I move like a cat in carpet slippers.
And I am Luke Murphy, and my watch controls the will, the entire nervous system. But unfortunately, it doesn't keep good time.
And for this episode, we well and truly have our bowler hats donned and our kinky boots clad, as we're going all the way back to the 1960s to take a look at a colourful British television series that truly made its mark on popular culture, with a stylish crime-fighting duo, a world of absurd plots, over-the-top characters, and interesting ways to use an umbrella under situations that it wasn't originally designed for.
Perhaps I am intruding.
You're not intruding.
Despite the show having multiple main characters across its 6-season run, it is actually the 2 seasons involving the legendary pairing of Mr. John Steed and Mrs. Emma Peel that are etched into the subconsciousness of popular culture. So, if that's your only exposure to the series, then allow us, your middle-aged movie boys, to introduce you to, well, some of the other characters.
That was very, very dirty.
If you haven't yet worked this out by this stage, this has absolutely nothing to do with those Johnny-come-latelys from Marvel Comics with their hammers and their shields and their fancy suits of armour. In fact, in this country, the first Avengers film was retitled as Avengers Assemble in order to avoid confusion with what us Brits like to call the proper Avengers. The origins of the Avengers can actually be traced back to a short-lived half-hour series from 1960 called Police Surgeon, which was made by ABC Television. The show itself wasn't a particularly big hit, but the show's main lead, Ian Hendry, was seen as a star in the making. Keen to capitalise on this, ABC's head of drama, a Canadian television producer called Sidney Newman, will begin to set the wheels in motion for a new crime drama series called The Avengers. Now, if the name Sidney Newman sounds a little bit familiar, well, it should, because the BBC would later poach Newman from ABC Television, whereupon he would become one of the masterminds that came up with this little programme called, hang on, wait a second, yeah, Doctor Who. I don't think we've mentioned that before.
Never heard of it.
Neither have I.
That'll never catch on.
Nah.
This new television programme, entitled as The Avengers, would start off as a black and white studio-bound crime series that took more than a slight bit of inspiration from Ian Fleming's James Bond novels and numerous detective noir thrillers. In the show, Hendry plays a brand new character, Dr. David Keel, who would become involved in crime fighting whilst investigating the murder of his fiancée, office receptionist Peggy, by a sinister drug cartel. Keel soon finds himself partnering up with a shadowy government agent called John Steed, who is also investigating the criminal cartel for his own reasons.
Steed was played by Patrick Macnee, who was born in Britain but spent a lot of his early career working in television and radio over in Canada. By the 1960s, he was back in Britain and actually working as a television producer. He was originally rather happy with settling into this role behind the camera when the chance to co-star in The Avengers came up, and although hesitant at first to take another acting job, Macnee eventually agreed to be cast in what would eventually become his most famous role, although he flat out refused to have a moustache, which was originally envisioned that Steed would have.
we go.
The introduction of this secondary character was initially to make the Avengers feel like a different show to Police Surgeon and to share the workload between the two cast members. But as time went on, Steed's importance to the show increased. Although the two men had a common interest, there would often be tension over the way they dealt with crimes and danger, between Keel's naive idealism and Steed's stoic professionalism. Of course, after the case of Peggy's murder has been resolved, the two men found out that they worked very well together, despite their differences, and thus the Avengers are formed.
Your philanthropy is just a little unexpected, I must say.
It wasn't all plain sailing at first behind the scenes, but then again, we're talking about something on this here programme, it's never plain sailing behind the scenes. Hendry actually tore up the first draft of the script in a temper tantrum, calling it utter crap. Oh dear. Shortly after the initial first bit of avenging, it also became clear that the character of Steed needed to have a little more of McNee's natural personality injected into him, as he had been written as rather amoral and unpleasant at times. So Steed underwent an eventual change of wardrobe, turning him from a ruthless and cold-hearted killer in a trench coat into a rather dapper-dressed gentleman of action, acquiring a tailored suit, a bowler hat and an umbrella, with a sword built into it that would become his signature trademark weapon, although he often just used whatever was close to hand.
In fact, McNee insisted on, and was proud of, the fact that Steed almost never carried a gun throughout the Avengers series. When asked why, he explained that he'd come out of a world war in which he'd seen most of his friends blown to bits, and so did not want to have his character associated with doing the same.
The show became a success based on the charm of its stars, but alas, the partnership between Steed and Keel would only be a short one, due to a longer than usual gap between the first and second season, thanks mainly to an extended actors' strike. Ian Hendry ended up leaving the show to focus on his movie career.
Sadly, not only was this partnership a short one, but a lot of it can't actually be enjoyed by a modern viewing audience. A good portion of episodes from this very first season are completely missing. Only 3 complete episodes are known to exist: Girl on the Trapeze, The Frighteners, and Tunnel of Fear, along with only about half of the very first episode, Hot Snow.
Now, programme makers at the time never thought audiences would be interested in rewatching programmes decades down the line. So as a result, the master tapes or film recordings weren't always looked after and would often just be re-recorded over again.
Thankfully, everything from the second season onwards is available, but the season 2 DVD of the show also has to include the surviving episodes of season 1 as well. So as you can see, it wasn't just early programmes of Doctor Who that had this problem.
Have we mentioned Doctor Who before? I can't remember. However, just like with Doctor Who, a lot of these missing episodes would be redone as Big Finish audio plays years after the original broadcast. More on that later.
So on to season 2, and with Henry's departure, the option was either to recast him, replace him with a new character, or just cancel the series entirely. Cancelling the series seemed to be a hasty decision, as the show had proven to be rather popular with audiences. And besides, McNee had made such an impression in the first season that making the decision to have him now become the star of the show, rather than the sidekick, wasn't a particularly difficult one. But Steed couldn't exactly go off avenging on his lonesome. He needed a partner to watch his back throughout season 2.
So for a number of episodes, Steed would also partner up with another doctor, Dr. Martin King, played by the actor John Rollison, which was essentially a low-effort attempt to use the leftover scripts from the Keel and Steed episodes of season 1 without having to do any rewrites. Another occasional sidekick for Steed would be nightclub jazz singer Venus Smith, played by Julie Stevens.
Now, Stevens wasn't Sidney Newman's first choice to play this new character, as he originally wanted Angela Douglas to play the role, but she was not available at the time needed for filming. After that, the decision was made to give the part to Stevens due to her singing ability. But alas, this was another partnership that would only be a short one, as it soon became apparent that Steed needed someone rather more permanent to do his avenging with him.
How's that, eh?
Just what the doctor ordered.
For the second season, producer Sidney Newman had the idea of teaming Steed up with a glamorous female character, Dr. Catherine Gale, who would be Steed's equal rather than his sidekick. This character wouldn't be a damsel in distress either, far from it, but rather a serious force to be reckoned with. Well skilled in hand-to-hand combat and firearms, knowledgeable in various areas of scientific research, and someone who made it notably clear that she wouldn't just simply put up with Steed's sometimes cold and aloof methods.
This ridiculous charade you always have to play. You can't just tell me in plain, straightforward language that you're after a gold smuggler.
Honor Blackman was cast in the role of Cathy Gale. She was a graduate of the Rank Film Organisation's Charm School, which attempted to create new British stars along the lines of Hollywood, and would teach its would-be stars not only the basics of acting, but also how to dress, how to speak in the Queen's English, i.e. talking posh, and even how to sword fight, because, you never know when that might come in handy. The school would end up producing such stars as John Collins and Christopher Lee, among many others. Blackman's casting was an instant success, and Cathy Gale became very popular with audiences. It was clear that the Steed and Gale partnership was the winning formula to go forwards with, as the episodes featuring Gale stood out significantly from the ones with either Martin King or Venus Smith. There was still a lot of action, but now with the added novelty of seeing a woman handling herself in a scrap, and of course there was the chance of having some slight sexual tension between the two leads, even if they didn't really trust each other at the start of the season.
You've been up to something fishy all day. I think it's time you explained what.
What's the matter? Don't you trust me?
Any reason why I should?
Blackman's costumes were designed around what would work best for her action scenes, and leather was chosen, since it seemed durable enough that it wouldn't rip in a fight scene or result in a wardrobe malfunction. But instead of these costumes lowering the sexual tone for early 60s audience, it actually did the opposite.
Might as well enjoy it while we're here.
For the show's third season, Gale got more of a backstory, where it was revealed that she was a widow and that her husband was killed some years ago on their farm in Africa. Her having a flirtatious relationship with Steed was somehow more family friendly if Cathy was a widow. Go figure.
During the second and third seasons, some of the storylines would be grounded crime stories with the occasional step into espionage. But every so often we'd get a slightly whimsical tone and elements of fantasy creeping into the storylines. For example, there's a terrorist group that want to take over the world, but they just so happen to be modelling themselves on the Roman Empire. As you do.
I did know somebody who tried shooting a pair of handcuffs off.
What happened?
Well, nowadays he's laughingly known as Lefty.
For these first 3 seasons, The Avengers was made in a multi-camera television studio and recorded to black and white videotape. Episodes were typically made on a fortnightly basis with 10 days of rehearsals, including fight choreography, before spending a few grueling hours in front of a camera to try and record the entire episode in one long session, like it was a stage play. So just like in early Doctor Who and other TV series of the time, if there were any mistakes that happened, like a prop door falling over, or a camera being visibly in shot, or the actors accidentally talking over each other,
They get one special piece to transmit of a secret.
So nobody
Then they
can
can't
double-cross anybody else?
Exactly.
then these were usually completely ignored, filming just carried on, and these mistakes would end up in the broadcasted episodes.
These broadcasted episodes would often be transferred to film to make overseas sales possible, and because television companies wanted to reuse expensive videotape. Thankfully, it's due to these overseas sales that resulted in a lot of the episodes from season 2 onwards still being available to watch.
What's it got to do with you?
I'm representing Her Majesty's government in the affair.
Does the government know?
Blackman had enjoyed her time as Mrs. Gale, but she had decided to leave the show at the end of her second year. However, before this, the show's popularity led to her and McNee recording a song called Kinky Boots. Yes, really.
And we might have a bit of it playing in the background, providing YouTube doesn't flag it. Boots, boots, kinky boots.
Blackman, however, was soon cast in the role of Pussy Galore in the 1964 James Bond film Goldfinger, and the show would make a nice little reference to her departure.
Oh, how nice of her to remember me. What can she be doing in Fort Knox?
longing for you.
So, the show's fourth season would see some major changes, with only the presence of Patrick Macnee carrying on from the previous seasons. In fact, with Blackman leaving the show, the producers were worried that Macnee would be thinking about doing the same. So they ended up, begrudgingly, I might add, giving him a small share of the show's profits from foreign sales.
The fourth season of The Avengers will be shot on 35mm film, with the filmed episodes being screened in the US on the ABC network during prime time. Now, of course, the company making the programme in the UK was also named ABC. There's no link between the two companies. ABC Television and the ABC Network, they are both just literally called ABC for no other reason than to appear early in the phone book. Yes, that is actually genuinely the reason why. Remember phone books, anybody? God, I'm old.
This is where you'd have companies called ABC or ACE or AAA, just so they could get there first. Yeah. Of course, Steed would need a new partner, and this is when we were introduced to Mrs. Emma Peel. Funnily enough, Emma Peel was originally going to be called Samantha, and as the scripts were being developed, her name was going to be shortened to Mantha. But then Marie Donaldson, a production press officer, had a flash of inspiration when she observed that one of the traits that the showrunners were looking for in this new character was man appeal, or M appeal. So therefore, the new character would instead be called Emma Peel. And no, I'm not making this up.
Now, originally, Elizabeth Shepherd was cast in the role, but after producers watched back over Shepherd's first couple of completed episodes, it was felt that she probably wasn't suitable for the role. She was certainly talented enough, but the character just wasn't the right fit for her, and she was reluctantly let go.
Good morning, Mrs. Peel.
Good morning, Steed. The door's open.
So a hurried recasting process resulted in Diana Rigg becoming Emma Peel instead. She would be a little bit younger than Blackman was, but Rigg had already made a name for herself as a serious actor, in particular on the stage, and her audition made her an instant hit amongst the producers.
Quite a feat considering that over 60 actresses auditioned for the part, and that she originally only went along because she thought it would be a bit of a giggle.
A bit of a giggle.
A bit of a giggle.
Just imagine if you're one of those other actresses that auditioned for it and didn't get the part.
Yeah.
And the person that did get it went, oh yeah, I just went for the laugh.
Just went for the laugh.
Thanks a fucking bunch. Anyway, like Steed's previous partner, Peel was a widow after her husband went mysteriously missing in the African jungle. Again, with the widow, Steed. What's going on there? And the husband's disappearing in Africa? What's all that about? I mean, he's got a type, I'll give him that, a very precise type, but he's got one.
He's definitely got a type. Of course, the production initially treated Mrs. Peel as if she was Kathy Gale Mark II, giving Diana Rigg the same hairstyle and for a time the same leather outfits, and of course she had martial arts skills as well.
Steed and Peel became icons of style and fashion and made for an engaging pair, looking as cool as cucumbers as they actually took it in turns to rescue each other. Like with Steed and Gale, they're definitely just partners, just platonic friends, but a deeper connection was often hinted at slightly, if you read between the lines.
I asked the chief predator where to find you, and he said, Mrs. Peel is in ladies' underwear. I rattled up the stairs 3 at a time.
Mary Quip's department on the 5th floor, sir.
Steed's character had softened and evolved over the years, and by the time of the filmed episodes he was no longer a ruthless cad or thug, but a dapper gentleman of action who enjoyed the good life and would be a little cheeky at times. Of course, that might have had something to do with our heroes enjoying a little bit of the bubbly in particularly every single episode. Honestly, it wouldn't surprise me if Steed and Mrs. Peel were as drunk as lords most of the time.
I'm a bit shaken, that's all. Ooh, and a bruise you'll just have to take my word for.
Already the show was a big hit, but it was about to get absolutely massive. The format to the film episodes of The Avengers was an evolution of the videotape shows, just with more style and an ability to stage a fight scene much more effectively, and with more camera angles. Oh, and they had actual editing this time as well, which certainly helped.
But as the season went on, the situations would become more bizarre.
I am dead. I've been dead for quite some time.
Episodes would centre around science fiction and horror elements like brainwashing, Day of the Triffids like man-eating plants, a school of assassins designed as a dating agency, and rainstorms that drown its victims. An average episode of The Avengers would feature quite a substantial body count before the end of credits.
6 bodies in an hour and 20 minutes. What do you call that?
A good first act.
Oh, and a year before the Cybermen came wandering across the South Pole in Doctor Who, Steed and Mrs Peel had to contend with the Cybernauts, robotic assassins who dispatched their unfortunate victims with a well-placed karate chop, accompanied by a suitably over-the-top sound effect. Hi-ya!
These cyber karate chopping contraptions would appear twice during the original series, each time serving a different master, with Michael Gough playing their ill-fated controller for this first appearance. Michael Gough is probably best known for playing the part of Alfred Pennyworth in the Batman movies from the late 80s to the early 90s. He would actually show up multiple times in the Avengers series, but he'd play a different character each time. The Cybernauts would return again years later when the series went to colour, this time with Peter Cushing as their master. And then once again in the 1970s revival series, The New Avengers. But we're getting a little ahead of ourselves here.
Not only would the storylines and the characters become more surreal and eccentric, the sets and the locations would soon reflect upon this in turn. And, of course, the whole thing would always end in a big fight sequence, because, the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Now, if the words kinky and perverse were used to describe the Avengers by some at the time, it's actually not until we get to the 4th season where things start to get a little steamy under the collar. The episode A Touch of Brimstone would occasionally be censored and even banned outright from being broadcast. And although it doesn't outrightly come out and say that yes, the private club in the episode is an S&M bondage club, come on, the signs are clearly there. And we get to see Emma Peel wearing a costume, well, like this.
Touch of Brimstone would later go on to become a very obvious inspiration for the Hellfire Club in the X-Men comics, and it's probably fair to say that Emma Frost was based on Emma Peel too.
Well, not only that, but the Hellfire Club's London branch is led by their Black Queen, who just so happens to be called Emma Steed.
Oh.
Which is quite blatant when you think about it.
Wow, okay.
By the time we got to the 5th season, the Avengers had finally taken a step into Glorious Technicolour and had left behind the days of black and white telly. Which seems like a good time, I think, for us to take a break and refill our champagne thoughts.
Oh, absolutely.
So, do be sure to come back for part 2, which will cover the Avengers in colour from 1967 to 1969, as well as making a return to television screens in the late 70s for the New Avengers. And, oh god, I suppose we better cover that Avengers film from 1998 as well.
Oh, really?
Bloody hell, Sean Connery, between Zardos and Highlander 2 and this, you really know how to pick 'em, mate. Anyway, see you in part 2. It is now the year 1967, and by this time the show had come into its 5th season, the 2nd with Diana Rigg, and had finally taken the step into Glorious Technicolour. It was also beginning to be made to appeal to a more worldwide audience. Well, we say worldwide, it was more like North America. But American TV channels were happy to pay big money to have these shows broadcast for their audiences. In fact, selling a TV series to America would make a studio more money than selling it to the rest of the world combined.
And as a result of this new worldwide audience, the Avengers did make a few concessions to make it appeal more to the American market, but it was still able to keep its quintessential Britishness, which was still the show's main selling point. Although the Avengers is probably the reason why most visiting Americans to Great Britain think that we all live in stately homes and castles. And, we do. We've all got a castle over here. Didn't you know that? We have had it up to here, with fecking castles.
We just long for a bungalow or something.
And as a result of its new American audience, the Avengers found themselves having to tone down some of the more surreal and comedic aspects to the series, but that didn't mean that every so often the storylines would still go off into some fairly wacky territory.
These two villains have swapped minds with Steed and Emma. So at the moment, the villains look like this, while our delightfully dashing duo Steed and Emma look like this.
Or our heroes would find themselves in some sort of overly complicated and overly elaborate death trap, which is something that the 1960s Batman television series was also doing at the same time.
I'm going to place him in an easily escapable situation involving an overly elaborate and exotic death.
Why don't you just shoot him now? I mean, I'll go get a gun, we'll shoot him together. It'll be fun. Bang! Dead. Done.
One more peep out of you and you are grounded, mister, and I am not joking.
Plots would often delve into the realms of science fiction or fantasy, but before the end credits started rolling, they would dial it back with the eventual explanation of it wasn't really time travel, or it wasn't really aliens, it was just a fancy laser. Yes, again. The season had a kind of format, 2 or 3 people being murdered in an unusual way, and then Steed and Peel getting the call to say that they're needed. And these calls to action would often occur during the most inconvenient of times, such as poor Emma trying to get on with stripping off here.
What?
Her wallpaper.
Oh, right, okay. Please do try to control yourself, David. Anyway, the repeated line of Mrs. Peel, "We're needed," would become the catchphrase of the show.
We're needed. We're needed.
There was a killer who electrocuted his victims, a plot involving the process to shrink objects,
There you are, Mrs. Peel.
and a village that turned a blind eye to murder. Shades of the Wicker Man there. Not to mention a return visit to the series of its only recurring threat, those pesky Cybernauts, this time with Pete Cushing taking the lead role of the villain, controlling them from Michael Gough.
My turn.
What a shame that the show never did a crossover with John Pertwee's Third Doctor in the 1970s. Now that would have fitted together rather well. Don't you think so, John?
Splink! 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 Splink!
Oh, you're back!
Cushing's frequent horror co-star Christopher Lee would even turn up in the episode Never, Never Say Die, as a baddie who controls an army of robotic doppelgangers to carry out diabolical deeds for his own benefit, which sounds an awful lot like Westworld and The Stepford Wives and Casino Royale 1967.
Yeah.
They loved using that storyline over and over again.
In fact, throughout the years, the Avengers featured an absolute who's who of British acting talent, including the likes of not just Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee and Michael Gough, but also Brian Blessed, Bernard Cribbins, John Cleese, John Pertwee, Nicholas Courtney, Roger Delgado, Anthony Ainley, Ronnie Barker, Julian Glover, and many of the cast from Dad's Army.
Well done for reading that out in one breath.
Thank you.
I actually had a longer version than that planned, and then I thought,
Should have put in a longer version. I still would have done it.
I should have done.
Boom.
It's unethical, just not cricket.
You said that too.
We need a drink.
That you haven't said.
The 5th season was colourful, stylish, and a lot of fun. They also tended to be the episodes that got repeated on television more often, mainly because they were in colour, and also because of the wonderful, wonderful pairing of Steed and Peel that audiences still remember the most fondest to this very day.
To turn up in armour really is very inconvenient.
You're telling me I couldn't find a dress to match it.
But it wasn't all fun and games. Behind the camera was a different matter altogether.
Diana Rigg, at several points during her tenure on the series, was unhappy with certain aspects and wanted to leave. The increased workload was beginning to get very demanding for her, and it was preventing her from getting to perform on the stage, which was her main passion at the time. When she found out that the cameramen were being paid more than she was, That was the final straw. She asked for a pay rise. They said no, so she quit. If it wasn't for ABC's tight-fisted sexism, we might have had a bit more Steed and Peel bastards.
Can't believe that.
When you find out, and I believe she found out accidentally.
Yeah. So she was never supposed to know.
She was never really supposed to know. I think she knew that Patrick McNee was getting more as Steed.
He had been around for longer.
And he had been around for longer and what have you. But it was never mentioned. So, but yeah, when you find out that, hello, you're the actress, you're the second lead of the series, and you're getting paid less than the cameraman. And let's be honest, can we blame her?
No.
No.
Not at all. Not at all.
I absolutely refuse to do it.
So Diana Rigg would sadly leave the show after the 5th season, where she would appear in films like The Assassination Bureau,
which is brilliant,
Julius Caesar, and of course she would follow Honor Blackman into a James Bond film when she appeared in On Her Majesty's Secret Service.
Best Bond film ever.
Rigg had been hired to provide the film some much-needed star power, seeing as Sean Connery had stepped down from playing 007 at this point, and an inexperienced lead had replaced him in the form of George Lazenby, who of course would go on to play Bond just the once, thanks to some of the most appalling, dreadful career advice ever from his agent, who said, "Yeah, these aren't gonna carry on, George. You're better off doing something else."
And then he turned up to the premiere, by which point he had grown a full beard.
Yeah.
And the producers, Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman, just turned around, Bond does not have a beard.
Yeah.
But I do. So,
yeah. Rigg's performance in this would become one of the most memorable Bond girls in the entire series, to the point where even after Lazenby moved on and we had Connery and Roger Moore, they would still refer to that character of Tracy Bond.
So, despite the falling out over pay, Diana Rigg did come back for one last appearance in the opening episode of season 6, so that Emma Peel could be officially written out of the series. She and Steed could say goodbye, and that the role of Steed's psychic could be properly handed over to newcomer Tara King.
He likes his tea stirred.
Yes, it turns out that Emma's husband, Mr. Peter Peel, who had been missing, presumed dead all this time, was now found, and so at the end of that episode, the two Peels drive away together and, well, she definitely has a type, I'll give her that.
So, Emma Peel was gone, and in her place came Tara King, played by Linda Thorson, who was fresh out of drama school at the time. And like what happened with Emma Peel first becoming Kathy Gale Mark II, Tara King was made up to be similar to be Emma Peel at first. Like Kathy and Emma before, Tara could also hold her own in a scrap.
Practically everyone does when they hear my name. Tara, you see. Ta-ra-ra-boom-dear.
Now, the first few episodes were apparently a bit of a disaster. 2 of them were even deemed unsuitable for broadcast. The scripts seemed to be missing the series' magic, and dramatic rewrites had to be made. And ABC seemed so determined to shake off the Emma Peel influence that they insisted that Thorson dyed her hair blonde, which actually resulted in all her hair falling out. As a result of this, some of Tara King's early stories see Thorson wearing a wig, and it was quite a time before her natural brunette locks grew back.
Hello, Tara King.
Steed had answered to numerous bosses over the series who would pop up from time to time, but this final season introduced another, the cigar-chomping Mother, played by Patrick Newell. Mother was mainly wheelchair-bound, having been cut down in his prime by a stray bomb blast. Mother also had a running gag where his base of operations, or his office, would be set in weird locations such as a swimming pool, a field of buttercups, or the top of a double-decker bus. Yes, I know I'm saying it again, but no, I'm not making this up.
He really isn't. McNee didn't particularly like this new character being brought in, but he did like the actor. So in fact, he would remain on very, very good terms with most of his castmates. Although in his autobiography, he does admit he was a little harsh on Linda Thorson's performance. He was, understandably, devastated to see the departure of Diana Rigg, whom he'd absolutely adored and felt that things just weren't the same without her. And although there was absolutely nothing wrong with Thorsen's performance at all, she just had the misfortune to come after Honor Blackman and Diana Rigg.
It's also very likely that Macnee wasn't thinking too clearly at the time, because he was becoming addicted to, unknowingly, amphetamines, which were prescribed to him by his doctor with the intention of helping him lose some weight. It was only when Macnee tried to get, and was refused, a repeat prescription when he was visiting Australia that he realised the tablets he were taking were in fact a dangerously addictive type of speed.
Whoa, hang on. Don't you dare put a clip of the apple in here now. We have already covered that abomination. Don't do it, ever.
America, the home of the brave, is popping pills to keep up the pace. And every day she cries out for more speed. From New York out to LA, everybody does it her way. Pumping power by the hour. Speed.
I'm going to kill him now.
It's the joke that just keeps on giving.
Moving swiftly on. The final season is certainly entertaining enough. It's competently made, and audiences grew to enjoy the new pairing of Steed and Tara King. But whilst the show still had its quirky and silly touches, its outlandish design and its exaggerated characters, it didn't feel quite as amusing. It felt like the Avengers had lost a little bit of its charm. It was a little more serious. The playful surrealism that had come to define the 5th season had been dialed back a bit. There was the odd occasion when the show dipped its toe back into something a little quirkier, such as the episode Game, where seemingly harmless board games become deadly weapons. But the 60s style that had pervaded the Diana Rigg episodes was clearly changing into a more sort of slightly garish look of the early 1970s, for better or worse.
In the US, ratings of the 6th season had gone severely down thanks to competition from other shows, and from there the writing was on the wall. The final season appears to leave Steed and King stranded in space, but there's an assurance that they will be back one day.
They will be back. You can depend on it.
Which is also how the last episode of The New Adventures of He-Man ended. Bit odd, that. Anyway, the Avengers made such an impression to the pop culture consciousness that the series would often be playfully parodied in other television shows.
I saw that on television.
It's very good, but keep your voice down, Mrs. Peel.
Although, the Avengers itself wasn't afraid of lightly making fun of some of its other rival television programmes, with some episodes named as obvious parodies of shows like The Man from U.N.C.L.E. and Mission Impossible, for example.
And this one scene in particular, which wouldn't have looked out of place in the Batman television series being broadcast at the time. Splat, indeed.
After the series ended, Patrick Macnee followed in the footsteps of his previous co-stars, Honor Blackman and Diana Rigg, by appearing in a Bond film himself, in A View to a Kill. The success of the show meant that Macnee wouldn't be short of work for many, many years, as he would move to America and become known as that guy who appeared in pretty much everything. Horror movies, episodes of TV shows, providing voices for the series Battlestar Galactica, and making numerous guest appearances in the likes of Magnum, War of the Worlds, Spinal Tap. He even shows up in Thunder in Paradise, for crying out loud, acting alongside Hulk Bloody Hogan.
If anyone knows of any reason why these two people should not be married, let him speak now or forever hold his peace. This marriage is a deception and a fraud. It's based on commercial enterprise, not love, and I shall reveal it as such.
Finish the ceremony.
Honor Blackman and Diana Rigg would appear in numerous other television shows and films as well. Both of them would indeed make guest appearances on Doctor Who, the latter appearing with her daughter Rachel Sterling. And Diana Rigg would of course gain an entire new generation of fans whenever she turned up in Game of Thrones as Lady Olenna, a woman with infinite sass.
You can smell the shit from 5 miles away. I eat from plates stamped with roses. I sleep in sheets embroidered with roses. I have a golden rose painted on my chamber pot, as if that makes it smell any better. What is your name again? Barbara?
Obata.
You look like an angry little boy. Don't presume to tell me what I need.
Forgive my sister. What she lacks in diplomacy, she
Do
makes...
shut up, dear. Anything from you? No. Good. Bring me some cheese.
The cheese will be served after the cakes, my lady.
The cheese will be served when I want it served, and I want it served now. Luckily for you, the Queen Regent is rather distracted at the moment, mourning her dear departed boy, accusing her brother of his murder, which he didn't commit.
Well, he could have done.
Oh, he could have done, but he didn't.
You don't know, Grandmother.
But I do know. You don't think I'd let you marry that beast, do you?
Linda Forston also has an extensive list of guest star appearances, popping up in the likes of Moonlighting, Dynasty, Law and Order, Silent Witness, Schitt's Creek, and many other shows. She does have a regular role between 2006-2007 as the villainous Rosemary King in the ITV soap series Emmerdale.
Oh, bloody hell, she did.
Yes, believe it or not. And she even popped up as a Cardassian in Star Trek The Next Generation.
You are remarkably short-sighted, new dad.
Behind the scenes, producers Albert Fennell, Brian Clemens and composer Laurie Johnson would form a new production company that would go on to make the new Avengers in the mid-1970s. More on that in a moment. And for some reason, Clemens went on to become a writer on Highlander 2 The Quickening, which we covered in our previous episode, and oh boy, that was a mess.
You don't really believe all this rot, do you?
Even though there were no episodes of the show being made anymore, the popularity of the Avengers meant that it would get repeats and reruns again and again, not just in Europe and America, but even down under as well, winning it a whole new legion of fans. From there, the Avengers would get a stage play, a radio series, a number of Big Finish audio stories, and numerous pieces of merchandise. Matney and Thorson even briefly returned to their roles as Steed and King for a French champagne commercial. So you could say that the Avengers might have gone, but it never truly went away.
¿Son invitados tuyos? ¿Te molestaría encargarte tú sola de recibir a tus amigos? Permíteme que te explique, querida. El champán Laurent Perrier debe tomarse en su justa temperatura. Exactamente debe servirse entre 44 y 46 grados. Y sobre todo en la más estricta intimidad. Espero que no venga nadie más esta noche.
So it was only a matter of time before a brand new spin-off series was commissioned. Right, that's it for part 2. We're going to take another short break and follow Steed and King's example and get our champagne flutes refilled. When we come back in part 3, we'll be making the jump from the 60s to the 70s, where we'll be taking a look at the new spin-off series, The New Avengers. And I suppose we better take a look at that 1998 Avengers film as well. You can tell I'm putting this off, can't you? See you in part 3. Last time we checked in, our dynamic duo John Steed and Tara King had miraculously escaped their space-bound predicament and reunited for a bubbly French champagne commercial, of all things. This little commercial stunt got folks buzzing about bringing our beloved show back from the TV graveyard. Although, thanks to endless reruns of the show, half the audience hadn't even realised that the Avengers had kicked the bucket in the first place. So, with some fancy French cash being flashed from IDTV, producers Albert Fennell, Brian Clements and composer Laurie Johnson decided to get the band back together. Faster than you can say Mrs Peel, where needed, they whipped up a shiny new production company with the most creative name ever, the Avengers Film and Television Enterprises Limited. I wonder how long it took for them to make up that name. And the sole intention of this new production company was to cook up a brand spanking new series. And so, the adventure continues.
The New Avengers arrived in 1976, bringing together a more mature John Steed with two younger members of the team. For the first time since the Keel and Steed pairing, there was another man on the team, Mike Gambit, a top agent, crack marksman and trained martial artist, played by Gareth Hunt, he of coffee advert fame.
People sometimes say to me, why do you keep saying Nescafe's a blend of 3 types of the finest coffee beans, specially roasted? For a richer, smoother flavour.
who had achieved a certain amount of notoriety for his role in the immensely popular TV series Upstairs Downstairs, where he played footman / gigolo Alberto. Wow, what a name for a gigolo. Alberto. Gambit wasn't too far away from this character, as an assortment of different lovely ladies were often seen in a state of interesting undress at his bachelor pad.
The other new member of this team was Purdy, played by Joanna Lumley, a former trainee with the Royal Ballet to which she acquired the high-kicking skills she frequently uses in this series. Purdy was essentially a combination of many of the best talents from Steed's previous female partners, including her humorously keeping Gambit's romantic advances at bay, which harked back to the Steed and Kathy Gale era.
Where'd you learn that, the Royal Marine?
Royal Ballet. They threw me out.
There were 2 seasons in total, making up for 26 episodes of slightly less silly, slightly more gritty and grounded 1970s adventures, although they weren't really a huge stretch from the Tara King episodes. During this time, the New Avengers team encountered the likes of giant rats under the streets of London, a villain that could control birds into attacking intended victims, a gas that puts the entirety of London to sleep in order for ultimate robbery to be committed, and the return of the Cybernauts for their 3rd and final appearance.
An attempt to get Diana Rigg to appear as Emma Peel in the new series was unsuccessful, although old footage of her on the phone from 2 1960s episodes of The Avengers, The Winged Avenger and The Hidden Tiger, were used to allow the character to make a cameo appearance in the episode K is for Kill Part 1, The Tiger Awakes, with Sue Lloyd providing the voice of Mrs Peel for these sequences.
Wow, actually stealing tactics from Godfrey Ho there.
Yes.
Now
literally.
that is cheap.
Ian Hendry, who had played Steed's original partner David Keel, also guest starred in one episode, but sadly he was playing a different character entirely, which to me just seemed like a massive missed opportunity.
Massive missed the trick completely. Although not as massive a hit as the glory days of Steed and Mrs Peel pairing, the New Avengers still proved to be a flawed but fairly popular show overseas. Although poor scheduling of the programme didn't really do it many favours in the UK, the 3 leads had a lot of chemistry between them, actually becoming very close friends behind the camera as well. But sadly, this was it for the Avengers on the small screen.
But the big screen? Oh, well, that was another matter entirely. There had been talk of a feature-length movie by American studios for a number of years. The rights to making a feature-length Avengers adventure would bounce around from studio to studio, effectively being stuck in what is known as development hell for a number of years, until it was eventually made, and oh boy, it really shouldn't. Plans for a feature-length adaptation based upon the series circulated during the 1960s, 80s and 90s, with Mel Gibson at one point being considered a frontrunner for the role of John Steed, if you can believe that.
Really?
Mel bloody Gibson as John Steed.
No.
More tea?
No, thanks.
I meant me.
But unfortunately, the eventual 1998 film starring Una Thurman as Emma Peel, Ralph Fiennes as John Steed, and Sean Connery as the main villain of the film received extremely negative reviews from critics and fans, and is a notorious commercial failure. Now, for the record, I felt that Ralph Fiennes was an excellent casting choice for Steed, and ahead of its time too. This was years before Fiennes would turn up as James Bond's new boss in the Daniel Craig era of 007, and it was years before he would also appear in The King's Man for more spy shenanigans.
I said this is all terribly formal. Must I go on calling you Dr. Peel?
No. Under the circumstances, you may call me Mrs. Peel.
Much better.
Una Thurman, on the other hand, was a big star at the time, having recently appeared in the likes of Pulp Fiction and Batman and Robin, and she absolutely had the physicality required for the part of Emma Peel. She rocked the leather catsuit look years before she'd do it again in Kill Bill, And she didn't do a bad attempt at an English accent either.
Actually wasn't that bad, but Sean Connery was, shall we say, an interesting casting choice for the villain of the piece. Just like with Highlander 2, you do get the impression that he's read the amount of the paycheck before he's actually read the script. He seems to be enjoying himself playing a baddie for once, but he's the only person that had a good time whilst making this film.
Oh, do shut up!
We've had Sean Connery featured quite a few times now on this year's show. Between this, Zardos and Highlander 2, he really knew how to pick them, which says a lot that none of these films made him want to retire from the movie business, but The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen did. The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. I'm just going to make a quick note of that. No reason.
No. Absolutely not. Never, ever. Not happening. No mas.
Yeah, we'll see. And Eddie Izzard was absolutely wasted here. Rather than letting him talk, the flamboyant stand-up comedian was instead playing Connery's main henchman / thug who would only chew gum and hit people. And the chewing gum thing was Izzard's idea, just to make it look like his character was doing something interesting. I don't know about you, Luke, but I think of hired thug, and Eddie Izzard is not the first person that comes to mind.
Not really, no. Warner Brothers didn't exactly do the film any favours either, when they demanded that the original 115-minute version of the movie was drastically cut down. Actually, that's too polite. They had the film absolutely gutted to 89 minutes. That clearly had a lot of the middle part of the film removed, and it looks like a good chunk of the explanation, coherence, and continuity as to what the hell was going on went with it. Now, no doubt they did us all a favour, but it doesn't help. Instead of just being a bad picture, the missing middle makes The Avengers a weird and strangely odd film.
For example, there's never a moment when Peel and Steed realise who the main villain is. The next, they're in a Titanic battle to the death. At one point, Emma is shackled and floated around in a hot air balloon, and we have no idea how she got there.
The original cut of the film is yet to surface, and I wouldn't hold my breath over it happening either, despite the fact that the director, Jeremiah Chechik, has offered Warner Brothers his services to recut the film for free. By far, the worst casualty of the recut film, though, is Michael Kamen's original score for the movie. Kamen has composed music for such movies as the original Highlander, X-Men, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, License to Kill, Lethal Weapon series, etc. Kamen's score for the Avengers included the original Avengers television theme, but he was unable to rescore the film after the drastic cuts were made, and so he was forced to drop out of the film entirely, taking his score with him. Now, we're not saying that Kamen's score would have saved the film, but it would have helped to make it feel like it was a better experience than it actually was.
What an absolute waste of Kamen's time and his talent. In fact, that sums up the entire film, really. A complete waste of the cast, of the source material, of the rights, and really of everyone's time. It's almost like it went out of its way to be disliked by as many people as possible.
And perhaps the only person that comes out of this smelling of roses is actually Patrick Macnee. He makes a small cameo appearance in the film as the voice of the character named Invisible Jones, and it's probably the best part of the film.
Don't worry about me being invisible. Learnt the trick in camouflage, till the accident made rather a mess of things. Now I'm stuck away in the basement. Lucky if I even get the tea trolley.
And I'm guessing that he read the script and thought better than to actually, appear on screen. Good for him.
This film came at a time when Hollywood had become increasingly obsessed with adapting old 60s television shows into feature-length movies. Now, Mission Impossible did this very, very well, actually, and the film series is unbelievably still going today.
Apart from Mission Impossible 2, which is a bit of a mismatch.
Yeah, that's a bit odd in tone, isn't it?
Yeah, that was the John Woo directed film.
Yeah. You know what the Mission Impossible series is missing? Doves flying in slow motion. Fucking loads of doves flying in slow motion. Also, dueling on motorbikes.
Yeah, that just... no, sorry.
But others, yeah, not so much. The Saints.
Oh, no.
Lost in Space.
Awful.
Wild Wild West.
An absolute abomination of a film.
And The Avengers all fell massively short of the mark and were deemed as huge, I mean fucking huge, box office flops. Would an Avengers reboot / movie work now? Yeah, I think it could. I'd personally like to see David Tennant as John Steed, with Eva Green as Emma Peel. That's me fantasy casting here. But until that happens, you still have 5 and a bit seasons, plus a spin-off series, to look back over of a stylish and somewhat quirky world of espionage, crime solving, and consuming copious amounts of champagne. Speaking of which, Luke, I'm a little parched. Time for a drink?
Absolutely.
Pub.
Always keep your bowler on in times of stress.
So, hello there. We are
Hi,
in
everyone.
Cooper's Bar for the first time in a while.
Yeah.
Last time we were in Cooper's Bar was when we were doing Hawk the Slayer, wasn't it?
I think it was. So that's a good 2 years ago.
It
something
is.
along those lines.
At the start of
So we haven't
season
been back.
4. Now, the significance of this is that tonight is actually the last night that Cooper's Bar is an independent bar, because after tonight, they're going to be owned by Brew York, which isn't a bad thing.
It's not a bad thing. I can Brew York do really lovely beer.
I can think of worse places for them to be taken over by, but we thought we'd mark the occasion by coming out here. On a similar line, we're getting to a point where the bunker, the building that the bunker is in, will soon be shutting down.
Yes.
And we think that either this episode or potentially the next episode will be our last time filming in the bunker. And we may have to
move to the new bunker.
Well, we need to find a new bunker, is what we need to do.
Well, technically speaking, I think we'll consider the new bunker to be Vault 115.
Yes. We don't want to set the world on fire. We just want to set a fire in your hearts. So,
get that, ladies and gentlemen? I'm sure you do.
Yes. So, the Avengers.
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
at the heart of the Avengers, we've had the delightful characters of Mr. John Steed and Mrs. Emma Peel, played by the suave Patrick McNee and the stylish Diana Rigg. Steed, with his impeccable fashion sense and trusty umbrella, exuded charm and sophistication, whilst Emma Peel, with her killer karate moves and striking wardrobe, was the epitome of a fierce, independent woman. Together they formed a dynamic duo that captivated audiences with their witty banter and effortless chemistry as they took down a slew of quirky, eccentric villains that added a touch of whimsy to the show.
And one of the most fascinating aspects of the Avengers was the evolution of its tone. The series began with a darker, more serious atmosphere featuring gritty espionage and intense drama, and however, as the show progressed, it underwent a remarkable transformation, embracing a more colourful, comedic and surreal approach. Suddenly we found ourselves immersed in a quirky scenario, larger than life villains and absurd but still captivating plots. The charming blend of action, humour and eccentricity made the Avengers a standout in the spy genre, or the spy-fi genre, as everybody's sort of starting to call it, establishing it as a beloved and influential series that continues to resonate with audiences to this very day.
So, let us raise a glass.
I mean, it's a glass of beer, it should be a glass of champagne.
It should be, yeah.
I mean, John Steed never drank beer.
No, never his tipple. But we'll raise a glass to John Steed's dapper attire, to Emma Peel's iconic catsuits, and the delightful, ever-shifting tone of the Avengers. And not to mention the likes of Kathy Gale and Tara King, to Martin King and Venus Smith, and to the original Avenger himself, Dr. David Keel. It may have started out as a serious spy drama, but it transformed into a whimsical, colourful adventure that left an inevitable mark on TV history. So cheers to the unforgettable escapades and unforgettable characters that made the Avengers such a fond favourite. To John Steed, to Emma Peel and to everybody else that as part of the Avengers team, we salute you.
Absolutely, a true British great.
And as we finish off our pints, our thoughts turn to the next episode, because for the first time ever, we are going to be tackling a fan-requested episode. In fact, several of you have requested this episode. In fact, a number of times we've referred to it But now we're finally going to do it.
Really?
We are going to take a look at Street Fighter, the movie.
Oh God.
Starring Jean-Claude Van Damme,
God.
Raul Julia, and Kylie Minogue.
I'm sorry, who?
Kylie Minogue. Yes, we will finally be doing it, folks. We will be taking a look at the disastrous pre-production, post-production, the production in general, the entirety of it. What went wrong? The fact that they had to.
Nothing went right.
Yeah. First-time director Stephen D. D'Souza. He was making sure that one of his leading actors was taking his medication to make sure it was okay, and he was making sure that his other leading actor was not taking a certain medication
to make sure he was okay.
Yeah, and it was an absolute mess.
It certainly was.
But despite all of it, and due to the performance of one of the main actors, it's remained an absolute cult classic and has become the stuff of has become quite iconic and has become quite meme-worthy as well.
It's become very, very meme-worthy and quite quotable as well, which we will go into in our next episode. So, Street Fighter the movie. Probably, well, we can't talk about Street Fighter the movie, we'll talk about Street Fighter the games. So we'll go into a bit of game lore as well.
Of course!
Yeah, that's a new thing. We're talking about video games. Yeah, I don't think we've done one of those things. No. So that's going to be the next episode, as always, with all of our sort of reviews. Thank you very much for joining us and listening to our ramblings. As always, there will be links and what have you, kind of here-ish.
Yes.
To the various.
There will probably be a subscription button appearing.
Yes.
Make sure you click on it. Make sure you ring that bell, baby, to make sure you're notified of any new videos that come across. Follow us on the old social media gubbins, and be sure to share this video far and wide. Leave a like, leave a comment, do all that good stuff.
Yeah. Comments are really, really nice, by the way. I do.
Yes.
We do always read them. He replies to them. I haven't yet because I feel there's a rabbit hole.
Yes.
But I do read them all, and they're lovely.
And we do appreciate them.
They are genuinely lovely.
Including the people that suggest that we review Jaws the Revenge.
No, that's never going to happen. That's never going to happen. Bless you for suggesting it, but it's never going to happen.
Yeah, but you said that about the apple, mate.
I did, yes. I did, didn't I? So
the more you deny it, the more likely it is going to happen. So, thank you very much for joining us. We'll catch you again later. We're going to finish off our drinks and maybe go to another couple of bars here in,
more than likely,
in sunny Guiseley.
Because it is quite sunny at the moment. It's lovely. And I leave you with this. Mr. Manley, we're needed.
What, in another pub? Well played. Right. Bye-bye.
Two old souls in the neon lights, tales of beer and movie nights, bonding over the lore of Zardos so deep. Those classic films they love to keep. Kung fu flicks and sci-fi bright, rose-tinted glasses in the night. Tales of a hero with sword in hand. Fire up the drinks, my friend. Middle-aged movie boys, living out classic joys. We need to talk about nostalgia loud and bright. We're time travelers in this bar, movies old and drinks from far. Cheers to films from days gone by. Raise a glass, let's touch the sky. Spy shenanigans, smoky rooms, horror marathons till daylight looms. bite the apple, go into a trance. Where did you get those golden hot pants? Dave and Luke in their bunker underground, giving fist bumps and a friendship found. These men of middle age in flight. You've got the drinks, I've got the light.